Alright, this is something that is a really uncommon memory that I'd forgotten about for a really long time, that I just had to tell a story about before I forgot. And that is the first time that I ever smoked a cigarette. I was actually like 19 and a half years old. And I had been working at Target when I was 17. And I remember those 2.5 years, there was a thing called Smoker's Corner. And it only applied to smokers. And you could smoke an extra cigarette if you were a smoker, even if you'd already taken your break or lunch. But it has to be to get out there, smoke the cigarette, and come back in. You're still being paid, and it's the only thing that they had an exception for, as far as addictions to chemicals go, or anything. If you smoke cigarettes, you get an extra break on top of your break. Like if you need to go smoke, and you've already gone on break, and you've already been on your lunch, just go smoke a cigarette on the company's time. Everyone else will keep working. And I remember thinking, man, cigarettes must be a really strong addiction. That must be a really fucking strong addiction. I should probably avoid that. And I remember getting that in my head strongly, but I was being kicked while I was down by not having weed when I was like really jonesing bad for some weed with my brother, and I didn't have any. And I was like, oh, like so bad from it that I went on a walk with him through a field, and I grabbed I grabbed 10 things that I could find in the field, and it was weed brush, some mint leaves, some tree leaves, some cactus, like the root, a dried leaf. I grabbed 10 different things. I wish I wrote them all down out of a field. And Greg was just like, okay. And like, I come back with him and I smoke it. And it's a pretty dark hit. It's like a pretty dark, it looks more like a campfire-ish hit. And I held it in for like a second and a half, and then I coughed it out really hard. I was like, oh, like this shit is so harsh. He's like, is it doing anything? And I was like, no. And then he starts laughing really hard, and he pulls out a cigarette. He's like, oh my god, dude, if you need weed, if you need to smoke something that bad, smoke one of these. And he pulls out a cigarette, and I was like, oh. Like, while I'm being kicked while I'm down, I would have never grabbed a cigarette, like, unless that was happening to me. Of course, it only happened once, where I was like, I needed to smoke something so bad because I smoked weed like every day back then, for like 2 years, and I never didn't have any for a single day. Right then I didn't have any that day, and oh man, it's just like, oh man. Felt like somebody who needed, like, somebody who's addicted to like opiate, like heroin, and didn't have any. Felt like that, but for weed. Caused me to smoke a bunch of random shit that I could find out in the field, and it didn't do anything to me except for like make me cough really hard, give me a slight headache. But like I wonder when the next time, if ever, I would have smoked a cigarette if that didn't happen. It's like, it seems like it's so unlikely that those two things would happen at the same time. I mean, what I'm talking about is the unlikelihood of the one time that I'm, like, in my life, even still to this day, that I've felt like I needed to smoke a bowl of weed so badly that I would do something like smoke a cigarette, which I strongly in my mind had, like, prejudice against the idea from working at Target for 2.5 years before I smoked a cigarette ever. And just thinking, in my mind being like, man, smoking, that must be a really strong addiction. Like, they don't even have a heroin section. Of course, because that's illegal. Because, like, it seems like only few things sucked as bad to withdraw from, that I could compare that coming off of weed time to like a really strong heroin addiction or like a really strong alcohol addiction, and then having something happen to you, like being thrown in jail. And I just say that because I remember I've been through jail, and there was somebody who was really addicted to alcohol, some old dude who they put in the cell. And he slept for a really long time the night they brought him in, and most of the next day, but when he got up the next day, like, he was only coherent and like there and not losing it for like 25 minutes before really, like, he started shaking and just laying down. He's like, this is the longest I've ever had to go without drinking alcohol in a really long time. And I'm thinking in my head, like, less than 25 minutes? Jesus. And they just weren't giving this guy any alcohol at all. And they came in and they gave him some pills. Because he was shaking really badly and he was starting to fucking lose it. But that's why that idea comes to mind. Otherwise, I don't think that idea would even at all come close to coming to mind if I hadn't seen that. But yeah, that's how I was feeling. Reminded me of that. But I've had other one. I think one of the worst things to ever have to come off of, the top two were methadone and Xanax for sure. Those are probably, Xanax is probably the worst thing I ever had to come off of. Which I took for like 3.5 years. Because shortly before that, I rolled ecstasy for every single day for 4.5 months, the Orange Dolphins. And the whole entire time I was doing it, it felt like I really couldn't get any actual sleep. Because I'd keep not being aware at all that I fell asleep on that shit when I was just rolling ecstasy every day. After doing it for like 2.5 weeks on, when I laid down, I had no idea that I fell asleep, and I kept waking up and going places in the house and then being certain that I'm awake, and then fucking waking up again and being like, holy shit, I was absolutely certain that I was awake, walking around in the house, like getting water. That's usually what I'd be doing, getting up to take a piss or getting up to get some water. And these really nut-ass things would start happening, and then I'd wake up again. It's like, right when I realized, like, something isn't right, I would wake up again. Like, one of the examples that I can remember is my vision froze, but I could still feel myself walking around. That was, like, one of the weirdest things that ever fucking happened to me. I was actually up, walking around in the house, and dreaming something completely different, and I wasn't waking up from it until I found a push button light switch, and the light immediately came on in real life and woke me up immediately, because I was like, holy shit, I know where I am in my room in the real world, and that I'm just dreaming this, but I can't wake up. That happened for like, until I found that light switch, for like 45 seconds. And I was completely tripping and like, I'm never going to forget this while it was happening. And it's the only time that it's ever happened. It was like, after 4 months of rolling ecstasy, every day that happened. But there would be weird shit, like I'd turn on the sink and the water would start going upwards, like into the ceiling in the kitchen. And then I'd be like, oh. And then right when it happens, I wake up in the bed. Like, right when I see bullshit that I know couldn't happen, I'd wake up. And that would happen, like, anytime I would lay down to try to get sleep. I would just not be aware that I even fell asleep at all. And keep dreaming that I'm really awake and I'm trying to get something done. like go take a piss or go get a drink or get up for work. There was a lot of those. Or I kept fucking getting up. And then when I finally did wake up, I was like, I could remember every bit of what was happening, like it was real life. It was that fucked up. It wasn't like when you wake up from a dream, and like when you usually wake up from a dream, you know how you forget all that shit, kinda? Like usually you can only remember a dream well for like the first 5 minutes. But that shit wasn't happening because my mind never switched over to that, to having your cognitive dissonance blinded like you do in a dream, and then your memory just forgets most, if not all of it, by the time you've woken up into this world. It's like that seems like a really strange thing to be so incredibly important in your life. Not that you're laying down, but that you're actually in another dimension, kind of forgetting about your real life. Because that's like what a dream does to your psychology. Is like teleports you to another dimension, which usually you're completely bullshitted by. And it's like your psychology needs that. But when I was rolling ecstasy, I didn't get that the whole entire 4.5 months. So I was just tripping really hard the whole time because I realized I must have been asleep in the real world, but I couldn't wake up for real, and like those memories weren't going away. I didn't have that break that I got from the real world that dreams give you. That was the only time in my life that I didn't have those breaks, and I started fucking going insane. And then when I just completely ran into it like a brick wall from stopping taking that stuff. And luckily I had somebody who could get a lot of Xanax. And then from then on, that fixed the problem. I don't know what would have happened to me if I didn't have any Xanax ready to go. Because I was tripping out to one of my friends about, I know it's going to be rough, like having to stop taking ecstasy. I had somebody give me 500 Orange Dolphins for $4,000. I couldn't resist. I was like, holy shit! You can get them for like $4 a piece, if and only if I buy $2,000 worth. You get 500 of them. Okay. Like, I wonder what my life would have been like if that didn't happen.